Perfect. Thank you. All right, so I think I have everything started. And I will also go ahead and just mute all participants as well. Okay. All right, we should be ready to start. So hi, everyone. My name is Abby. I also go by Abigail as well. It's just what I use professionally, but Hernando Audubon knows me as Abby. And as Bev said, I conducted a project with Tom St. Clair and Hernando Audubon as a whole over this last year. And we focused on red-headed woodpeckers. So the project was titled Red-headed Woodpeckers in West Central Florida, a case study using citizen science. Although Tom can't be here to make it, I'll still be bringing him up a lot because he is really instrumental in this project. There we go. So I'll go a little bit into my background. Bev touched on this as well, but I recently graduated from the University of South Florida with my Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Policy. I'll also be starting my PhD in Earth and Environmental Sciences at University of Michigan this fall. I'll be studying winter limnology, so it doesn't seem like it has a lot to do with this presentation, but I am really interested in changes to land use and how that impacts the environment really unite a lot of my research. Some of my past research has included wetlands, environmental justice, marsh vegetation, and harmful algal blooms. And since this is a Audubon talk, I have to say my favorite bird, it's a purple gallinule. Those are gotta be my favorite. First one I saw was in the Everglades. I'll never forget it. And this picture here on the left is me during my internship with the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in Delaware last summer. I unfortunately don't have a cool photo of me holding a bird, so the closest you're going to get today is a horseshoe crab. But this is during some of the surveying they do there for the horseshoe crabs and during their spawning season. So, all right. And then I did this project as part of the Conservation Leadership Initiative program, which is a program hosted by Audubon Florida. It aims to engage undergraduate students in conservation work. And pretty much how it works is students, college-age students from all over the state, you just have to be enrolled in a university or college in the state, can apply to this. And Audubon Florida brings together all of these students for their annual assembly. And then the students get paired up with a Audubon chapter that's close to where their university is. So for me, I ended up getting paired with Hernando Audubon. Now, even though that's a little bit far away from USF, I still made it work. But we get involved with our host Audubon chapter. We attend board meetings. We go to some of the hikes. And then all of the CLI students have to complete a final project. And this can be anything from a research project, which is what I chose to do. You can also do a guided hike, anything really that engages you with your host Audubon chapter. And so my host chapter was Hernando Audubon Society, and my mentor was Dr. Tom St. Clair. And this is a photo of us from our first day of meeting at the Audubon Assembly last year. And so when we were going over what we wanted to focus on for my project, we both really were inspired by citizen science, and we wanted to incorporate products that are from citizen science initiatives into a research project. We also wanted to make sure that I could conduct this project remotely, because even though I was able to go to many in Hernando County, it's still kind of difficult. So we wanted to make sure that I could do a research project that utilizes readily available data, so that I wouldn't have to be, traveling somewhere to be working in the field to collect my own data. And so we chose to incorporate the annual Audubon Christmas Bird Count. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have participated in a Christmas bird count. I'm going to go over a little bit of the history, and then I'll talk to you about more of the logistics of how Christmas bird counts work. But the first Christmas bird count was conducted in the year 1900. It was to replace the tradition of going out Christmas Day you could shoot. Instead, people were advocating for going out and seeing how many birds you could count. So the modern Christmas bird count, it's where an organization such as an Audubon chapter hosts people and they go out with a site guide, and you're able to go count as many birds as possible in the specific area. And you write down the species and the amount of each of those species that you see. So it's a pretty good survey for bird species. And it's the longest running ecological survey in the United States. And most importantly, it's all publicly available. So you can go onto Audubon's website and download as far back as every Christmas bird count goes to see what the sightings look like in the year 1970 versus now. So we chose to focus on the years 1990 through 2020 to look at the sightings for red-headed woodpeckers then. But for some of these places, you can go back into the 60s and 70s to see how many red-headed woodpeckers have been seen in Florida. And this also complements another red-headed woodpecker study that's conducted by the Audubon chapter of Minneapolis. It's called the Red-headed Woodpecker Research and Recovery Project, and it's the only ongoing red-headed woodpecker research project in the United States. It's been ongoing for 17 years. And although we're not really working directly with them, this project still complements that. And we're trying to spearhead the first red-headed woodpecker project in the state of Florida. And so thinking of this inspiration from citizen science initiatives, we started to come up with what my project would be for the CLI program. Our project goals were to lead the first study focusing on red-headed woodpeckers in the state of Florida. We also wanted to utilize citizen science data and publicly available data. We also needed to focus on a topic of concern for Hernando Audubon Society and focus our project on that region, the West Central region. And we chose to use the boundaries of the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And the whole goal of this project was to test this assumption that Tom, my mentor, had, that Hernando County has a large red-headed woodpecker population, and its population is sustainable compared to other areas within the Southwest Florida Water Management District. So I'll start off with a little bit of an introduction into red-headed woodpeckers themselves. That's the little guy you see on the left, also known as Melanurpes erythrocephalus, but I'll just call them the red-headed woodpecker. They're identified best by that complete red head, so that's what sets them apart from all other woodpeckers. And they are foragers, so for feeding, they go out and hunt insects. They can also store nuts in those cavities that they'll drill. They are found in forested areas and open plains, and they tend to prefer a mix of the two, especially areas that have a lot of snags, which are dead trees, that also are on like the edge of a forest and are next to a plains or like agricultural land or something like that, where it's easier to hunt insects. So they tend to like that like fringe or edge habitat. And they are migratory, but some of the red-headed woodpeckers you see here are not migrating. There's northern populations that will come down to winter in southeastern states like Florida, but there's also southern populations that are permanent residents. So as you can see from this range map to the left, or sorry, the range map to the right, you can spot red-headed woodpeckers all year long in Florida, especially in upland pine areas is where you're going to see them. And so if you guys don't know how the Christmas bird count is conducted and some of the mechanics behind it, many people think that you're just going out to whatever areas you want, maybe your favorite hiking trails, and then seeing how many bird species you can see and how many individuals within those species you see, and just write that down and turn it into your local Audubon chapter. But it's actually not that simple. That's what I thought we were doing. This is me on the Christmas bird count I participated in this past Christmas. But there's actually a lot of consistent protocol behind conducting a Christmas bird count. So when a host organization wants to host a count, they pick a point on the map where the count will radiate from. So the 2 points in Hernando County are the Brooksville and the Arapaika Bayport. So that's just the coordinate point that they choose to start the Christmas bird count at. And then around whatever coordinate point that group chooses, there's a 7-mile radius. Here's that 7-mile radius that the group can conduct counts in. So all of the counts that you conduct during a Christmas bird count have to occur within the 7-mile radius around that coordinate point. So that's what these purple circles represent. So when you are considering Christmas bird count data, you have to keep in mind that all of the numbers are really only representing this 7-mile radius around each coordinate. So we chose to only look at the land use change and any activity that's going on within these circles. So when you hear me reference Christmas bird count circles or like a CBC circle later in the presentation, this is what I'm talking about, is that 7-mile radius around each coordinate point. And we also took a look at land use land cover. So this is data that's provided by the Southwest Florida Water Management District. It's classifying the land in Florida into 8 different categories. Those categories are urban and built up, agriculture, non-forested, upland forest, water, wetlands, barren land, and then transportation, communications, and utilities. And urban and built up really includes anything. It doesn't just have to be cities, it's any area that has been built on, it's man-made. So you're going to see like residential areas are considered urban and built up. And then agriculture and upland forests are pretty self-explanatory. I chose to highlight these 3 land use categories because they're most important to red-headed woodpeckers. So upland forest is where you're going to find these woodpeckers, and then you might lose that upland forest to agriculture or urban and built-up areas. But agriculture is also interesting because it can provide habitat for them to forage for food, especially if a forest is bordering an agricultural area. So that's also an important place to keep in mind, is that agricultural areas could be providing food for red-headed woodpeckers as well. So I chose to highlight just those 3 and see what changes were happening in the land in those land use categories. And these are still those points from Hernando County on the right. Those are the Christmas bird count circles with the land use from 2020 applied within those circles. So this is what that Brooksville area and the Arapahoe Bayport area look like in the 2020 land use categories. And so the study area that we're focusing on for this project is the Southwest Florida Water Management District. On that map on the left, you can see that pink area, that's Swiftmud. And then the actual Christmas bird count circles that are within Swiftmud are shown on the right. Those dots you see are those 7-mile radiuses. And I think there's about 17 or so that we were able to use. I mainly focused on Christmas bird counts that actually had red-headed woodpeckers documented. There's some areas that don't document red-headed woodpeckers, especially like coastal areas that may not have any upland forests. They may be focused more on like seabirds and shorebirds. So if there was no red-headed woodpeckers documented, those Christmas bird counts were excluded from this study. But the ones that I'll be highlighting today, the specific Christmas bird counts, are shown in pink on the map on the right. So we have Brooksville, Arapahoe Bayport area, East Pasco, and then Myakka River State Park. So I'll go ahead and start off with the Brooksville area. So this is an area that most of you must be familiar with. This is where, if you're participating in Christmas bird counts through Hernando Audubon, this is where you would be participating. So with the Brooksville area, for every area that we go through, I'll go ahead and show you this graph. It's going to show the number of red-headed woodpeckers that have been counted over the last 30 years between 1990 and 2020. So this format for every area that we look at is going to stay pretty consistent. So the x-axis is the last 30 years, 1990 through 2020. And then we also have number of red-headed woodpeckers counted on the y-axis. So although there is a negative trend going on here over the last 30 years, when you're looking at the number of red-headed woodpeckers that have been counted in the Brooksville CBC, there is still a lot of red-headed woodpeckers that are seen. You don't really see these numbers in any other Christmas bird count site. It's really unique to the Brooksville area. And we'll see why in a second, but I mean, even looking in the 90s, you can see that at one point there was 50 red-headed woodpeckers counted, and this is just in one day. The Christmas bird count always occurs over one day, so the results that you see are the counts that volunteers were seeing on that specific day for each year. So it's really extraordinary to see this many in one day. Even in more modern Christmas bird counts, you're still seeing a lot of them, but there is an overall decreasing trend. And when we why that might be, we turn to land use. So the x-axis is going to stay consistent for all of the graphs you'll see, 1990 to 2020. But then the y-axis for all of these graphs on the right is the area within the Christmas bird count range, or the square miles, that's dedicated to each of those land use categories. And you don't need to keep in mind a lot of the square miles. I'll point it out if it's important, but I want you to look at the overall trend. So we have this negative trend when we're looking at the amount of red-headed woodpeckers that have been counted during Christmas bird counts. And then over the years, we also have an increase in urban and built-up area within Hernando County at the Brooksville Christmas bird count site. There's also been a decrease in agricultural area, and then there's also been a decrease in upland forests. However, I do want to point out that the square miles dedicated to upland forests is still greater than agricultural land and urban land. So there is still a lot of upland forests within this Christmas bird count area. However, it is decreasing. Those square miles are decreasing. And so what does this look like spatially? So this is what the year 1990 looked like in Hernando County over that Brooksville Christmas bird count site. As you can see, the green represents upland forests. Then we have that yellow color, that's agriculture, and then the urban area is purple. But you have this like large tract of upland forest, and then there's a lot interdispersed in there, some agriculture, and then even less urban and built up. But then when you go to the year 2020, there's been a lot more urban area developed, and there's been some forested land lost and agricultural land lost to this urban area. Then the other site within Hernando County is the Arapahoe Bayport area. So there's a lot less red-headed woodpeckers seen at this site, right? So we were seeing these really high counts in the Brooksville area, all above like 15. Normally, in a normal year, they see about 15 to 30 in one day, which is really great. At this site, they see less. They still see red-headed woodpeckers pretty consistently, but it's all generally below 10 red-headed woodpeckers. And it stayed pretty consistent. There's some outliers where there's been a lot of red-headed woodpeckers spotted, but over the last 30 years, you still see like a pretty consistent amount of red-headed woodpeckers. And it's low, and you don't see that many because of its land use again. So there's a lot more urban area in this area of Hernando County. As you can see, I mean, urban area is increasing. The amount of square miles dedicated to urban area in this part of Hernando County is about the same as the amount of square miles dedicated to upland forest in Brooksville. So there's a lot of urban area here. There's not a lot of agriculture, even though it is decreasing for what's there. And there is some upland forest. It's about half of what Brooksville has, but there is still upland forest here, but it is decreasing. So there is less and less upland forest available for red-headed woodpeckers in this area. But this is what Arapahoe Bayport looks like. There's a lot of urban area here. This is the coastline that you're seeing over here, so you're not going to see that many upland forests available for red-headed woodpeckers over there. But there is these pockets of upland forests in the year 1990 in these urban areas. And then when you go to the year 2020, a lot of those pockets have been lost or fragmented. So you're really losing upland forests in this area as well. You're losing agricultural land as well as this area becomes more and more developed. And then I'll go a little bit into detail about the East Pasco results. So this is a little bit south of where the Brooksville area is, but it's an interesting comparison to Brooksville. So there's still a low amount of red-headed woodpeckers that are counted in this area in Pasco County, but there is still a pretty consistent amount of red-headed woodpeckers counted. The trend here is somewhat consistent. It does have a slight negative trend. However, it's for the most part all under 10 red-headed woodpeckers that are counted. For the most part, honestly, it's like 8 and below every year. And this is not surprising because when you look at the land use within East Pasco, most of it is dedicated to agriculture. So there's not a lot of available upland forests for red-headed woodpeckers. There's been an increase over the last 30 years in urban area. There's been an overall decrease in agricultural land. However, there is still a large amount of square miles dedicated to agriculture in East Pasco. And there's been a slight decrease in upland forests in this area, but really you're seeing this exchange between urban area and agricultural land. And so this is what East Pasco looked like in the year 1990. As you can see, that is a lot of agriculture in this area. There's some urban and built up, and then there's those forests, those pockets of forest dispersed throughout this Christmas bird count site. And then when you look at the year 2020, you can see that a lot of that agricultural land has been lost to urban area. You've had some upland forest loss, but for the most part, it's been a loss in a lot of that agricultural land. And then I wanted to highlight the weird case that we have at Myakka River State Park. So we have this strange trend at Myakka, and the same trend is also seen in Venice. So in this really like southern part of this Southwest Florida Water Management District, there's a positive trend seen in the amount of sightings of red-headed woodpeckers during Christmas bird counts. So even though the amount of red-headed woodpeckers was pretty low up until about the year 2005, it's growing, and it's growing pretty quickly, especially when you look at the amount that have been seen in like the 2010s. So it's interesting that there's been an increase in red-headed woodpeckers in this area, especially because it's in the south. And then when you look at the land use as well, there's been an increase in urban area, but as you can see, there is not a lot of square miles that are dedicated to urban area in this Christmas bird count site. That's because most of it is occupied by the Myakka River State Park. And there was a lot of agricultural land in this area, but it's decreased over the last 30 years. And then the amount of upland forest, though, has stayed pretty consistent. And that's because there is this conservation of any upland forest in this area because they're within the state park boundaries. So there's somewhat of a fluctuation in the amount of square miles dedicated to upland forest, but for the most part, it stays about the same over the last 30 years. And because it stayed the same, that might have had this positive impact on the red-headed woodpecker population, because as there's more red-headed woodpeckers in the area, we're assuming that you'll be able to see more as you're out on these Christmas bird counts. And so this is what the Myakka River State Park site looks like. There's a lot missing in the middle. You see a lot of white because that's different land use categories there. There's a lot more upland areas that just aren't forest, as well as wetlands and water features. We just didn't include those because they're not as important to red-headed woodpeckers and their changes in habitat. So there is some upland forest in this southern part of the Christmas bird count site. There's agricultural land, and there's a little bit of urban area in the year 1990. But then when you go to the year 2020, there's been slightly an increase in urban area, but as you can see, for the most part, really the changes are in agricultural land and upland forests, which are not going to be areas that are within the state park boundaries. But then areas that are within the state park boundaries have stayed really consistent. And so this consistency might have positively benefited the red-headed woodpecker population in that area. But it's still weird. So really, when we saw those results, we were surprised. It's weird that there's this southern population of red-headed woodpeckers that have been increasing when you see a decrease in areas like Hernando, because we assumed that there was a large sustainable population of red-headed woodpeckers in Hernando County. So we asked the question, why are Myakka River State Park red-headed woodpecker counts increasing while we have these northern counts that are decreasing? And especially looking at this climate vulnerability map provided by National Audubon, you can see that this is the climate vulnerability map just for red-headed woodpeckers. And all of this red is going to be range that they'll lose with increasing temperatures and climate change. And so Myakka River State Park and Venice, if you aren't familiar with where they are, the two sites where red-headed woodpeckers are increasing are at like almost the southern tip of where red-headed woodpecker range currently exists. So especially with climate stress, they really shouldn't be increasing there. They should be moving north to areas like Hernando County. So it's interesting that they're not. And we think that the key might be in habitat management and how the habitat is being managed in Myakka River State Park versus other areas. So when we think of habitat management and how to manage for red-headed woodpeckers, generally what people think of is going to be prescribed burns. So you have this upland pine forest habitat where the red-headed woodpeckers like to hang out and have their nest cavities. And then in order to maintain this upland pine forest, you have to maintain a certain fire regime. And so that's why scientists and like government employees and land managers will go out and conduct prescribed burns, is that there has to be a specific fire regime that is maintained in order to maintain an upland pine forest. If a fire doesn't happen frequently enough, then the oaks in that area and other hardwoods can outcompete. So it will turn then not into a pine upland forest. So that's the importance of having those prescribed burns. And once you have those prescribed burns, you're also creating snags or dead trees, and then you can have nest cavities for the red-headed woodpeckers. They'll come in and they'll be able to drill their cavities. Now, we have another theory as well. So Myakka River State Park is obviously managing their habitat and protecting it, and we think that that is positively benefiting the red-headed woodpeckers that are there, especially in a state that is changing a lot and their land use is changing a lot. Even over the last 30 years, there is immense change happening in the state. But there is another theory that we have as to why red-headed woodpeckers might be preferring more southern locations as well. So we have this upland pine forest, and we need processes that are creating snags for the red-headed woodpeckers. And we think that one of those processes might actually be extreme storm events and hurricanes. So especially in recent years, I'm sure if you guys have been living here, you can remember there's been a lot of extreme storm events and hurricanes that have gone through the southern part of Florida and hit kind of that Sarasota and Venice area, whereas Hernando County hasn't been as hard hit. And so there is a good chance, now we haven't tested this theory, we could conduct some studies using like remote sensing and things to look at the amount of snags created by extreme storm events like this. But we think that extreme storm events and hurricanes may be creating some of those snags, and then red-headed woodpeckers can use those snags. Now, it's good for red-headed woodpeckers that we have these storms coming in and creating snags that can be used by them for their cavities. However, these snags only have a certain amount of time that they'll be standing upright. So eventually, I mean, the tree is dead, it will fall over. And so once you have more and more loss of trees due to these extreme storm events, you're going to end up really losing a lot of habitat that the red-headed woodpeckers could be using. And especially a lot of these storms that we've been having, if the red-headed woodpeckers are utilizing snags from those storms, those snags tend to stay up. I've heard about like 5 to 10 years. So if they're going to fall, they might be falling soon. So those red-headed woodpeckers might be looking for more habitat, more snags that are available. And that's where hopefully they can turn to those areas that are being managed and managed properly with good fire regimes. And red-headed woodpeckers are important to manage habitat for because they're ecosystem engineers. So we have this red-headed woodpecker. They come in, they'll create their cavities on these snags, on trees, and they'll start using that cavity. However, once that cavity hole starts to widen, so it can widen naturally just through the birds coming in and out of the cavity. Also, predators can widen the hole, as well as just the tree like starting to rot. once that hole gets too big, the red-headed woodpeckers won't use it anymore because it leaves them susceptible to predators. So they'll move on either to one that's already made, that's smaller, or they'll make a new one. But then having this larger opening allows for larger woodpecker species to use it, such as pileated woodpeckers. So they'll come in, they'll widen it even more, and be able to use that cavity for nesting for their young. However, once that becomes even too large for them and leaves them susceptible to predators, eventually that cavity will be really large and it'll be vacant, and birds that don't create their own cavities, such as American kestrels, can move in and use it for their young. So there's a chain of bird species that when you're managing habitat for red-headed woodpeckers, you're also managing habitat for all of these bird species, and any of the bird species that may also fit into these roles, any sort of other large birds that may be using the cavities that are created by pileated woodpeckers and widened by pileated woodpeckers. So it's really important to consider when you're managing this habitat, you're managing for all of these woodpeckers and all of these species that they influence. And so what can you do when we're talking about red-headed woodpeckers? So advocate for conservation of upland forests that are in areas still forested. This is especially important in Hernando County, where you do have this forested area that may be vulnerable to development. So it's important to advocate for it to be protected and also for it to be managed properly, and for that fire regime to be maintained so that the pine upland forest can be maintained for these red-headed woodpeckers. You should also participate in your local Audubon chapter. If you're not from Hernando County, I think most of you are, but if you're not from Hernando County, you should participate in your local Audubon chapter and Christmas Bird Count. If you are from Hernando County, please get involved with Hernando Audubon. They're amazing. I loved doing my project with them this year. I had such a great time, and all of their events are great. So you should definitely get involved and participate with their Christmas bird count. I got to see a lot of really cool species when I was doing my Christmas bird count, including we got to hear a bobwhite quail and a gray horned owl. So it was really neat, and it's a really great way to participate in this citizen science initiative and this this monitoring of these birds, because they can be used for research like this. And you should also raise awareness for the red-headed woodpecker and other woodpecker species, especially their needs in proper habitat management. So some conclusions from this project. Citizen science initiatives like the Audubon Christmas Bird Count can hold valuable data and stories, but these data sources are often underutilized. And conserving upland forests may be key to supporting sustainable red-headed woodpecker populations, such as the conservation that's happening in Myakka River State Park. And most importantly, there exists a very important red-headed woodpecker population in Hernando County that should be protected. By far, out of all of the Christmas bird count sites, there is more red-headed woodpeckers that are documented there than any other site in Southwest Florida Water Management District. And I think that that's really significant. Even though we can't really estimate the size of the population, based off of that, we can't assume that it's bigger than others in that area and in the Southwest Florida Water Management District, because there's only that one day where volunteers are able to go out and count birds. So we're assuming that there is a pretty large population because volunteers have to budget their time to get as many birds as possible. And if they're seeing over 20 red-headed woodpeckers just going out there and hiking around to see what they see, there's likely a really large population of them, especially in the Chinseega area. I'm sure if you're a part of Hernando Audubon, you've probably been there. That's where I saw my first red-headed woodpecker. So especially in areas like that, there is a lot of red-headed woodpeckers. And then the next steps for this project. We hope to conduct interviews with Christmas Bird Count volunteers, and we want to ask them, are areas being surveyed consistently over time, and have they noticed a decrease in suitable habitat for red-headed woodpeckers? Also, has the public and private lands that are managed for red-headed woodpeckers increased or decreased? We really want to know what these volunteers have seen with their own eyes over the last 30 years. They might have better insights than we do just looking at the raw data. I also hope to create science communication materials to disseminate the results through Audubon, Florida, using accessible language, and also participating in outreach opportunities like this presentation. Really love sharing these results, and I even more love sharing them with people who may not be in the academic community, because there's volunteers like you guys that are participating in these nonprofits that can really affect change with these results. I will also be continuing with data analysis and hope to publish these results in an academic journal. I'm working with a senior biologist at Audubon, Florida now on furthering some of this data analysis on this project. So it's been a really exciting project and a really fun time working with Tom on this and working with everyone in Hernando Audubon, getting some of their advice as we've gone through the results for this. So with that, I will take any questions.
So, Abby, I see one question from Nancy Dwyer, and she's wondering if you are aware of other studies of red-headed woodpeckers in Florida that are either happening now or have happened historically. And she's wondering if this may be one of the only ones that's being done.
Yeah, so I hope my camera's on now that you guys can see me. But we think, as far as I can tell, as far as Tom can tell, we think that this is the first red-headed woodpecker study conducted in Florida. We haven't found any others. And like we've searched, Tom has really searched. He's really passionate about this topic. So we haven't seen anything else about any other studies happening in Florida or currently happening. It's hard to focus on one specific species like this. Typically, you really have to, especially in the academic community, you have to focus on where like funding might be available and things. So it's hard to, you know, I could see how it would be hard to focus on this species because they're not technically listed as endangered, and you know, there's not this interest in really protecting them because they don't have that endangered status. Now, there's a lot more research going on into like similar species such as like the red-headed woodpecker, which is endangered. So I think that it's the first, and Tom thinks that it's the first. We could be wrong, and we haven't seen anything historically being done or anything being done now. But there is, like I said, there is studies being done on very similar species.
So I needed to add a comment on behalf of Tom. So, Tom Sinclair was very involved in this. He's our conservation and our chapter chair for Hernando Audubon, and unfortunately he couldn't be here tonight. But he did send me a message that he wanted me to pass on. And two parts to the message. I'll make it quick. One, he just wanted to share how incredibly excited he was about this research and about working with Abby, and how successful he felt this was, and how wonderful it was to work with a young conservation leader who's going to be doing this work for a long time and is really invested in the future of this type of activity. His second thing that he wanted me to make sure that we shared with everyone was that this is a great example of where Hernando Audubon should take this information and then start doing conservation work driven by this data. So whether it's advocating for more acquisition of upland forests in Hernando County, whether it's through reviving our environmental lands program or getting more funding from other state agencies to purchase land in this area, something like that, or I guess I should say, really working with the land management agencies in this area to support the work they do to manage the habitat, to support the use of prescribed fire, to support the activities that they're engaged in that are creating this habitat for these birds. One thing that Tom's concerned about is that as our population grows, there'll be more resistance to the use of prescribed fire. There'll be more people who aren't familiar with some of the land management techniques that need to be used. And he would like to create some opportunities to get the agencies to talk to each other and to think collaboratively about some of these things, but also to make sure the public understands that these amazing species are only going to exist if we're managing habitat really well. So the first step is to acquire more habitat, and then the second step is to manage it. And in that management process, we need to be vocal advocates for making sure agencies have the funding and the staff and the public support to do this kind of work. not only as it exists right now, but as Abby mentioned, in advance of changing climate as a strategy for resiliency for some of these species to get ahead of the curve. So that's a message from Tom, and he's going to be reaching out when our Hernando Audubon meetings resume in September through the Conservation Committee meetings, or through our general meetings, to really take what he and Abby worked on and try to turn it into an ongoing conservation campaign in Hernando County that we can publicize, talk about, but ground in this data. So we're not talking about something in the abstract, but we're talking about it in terms of real data that was generated by good research. So again, Tom wanted me to say thank you to everyone who was able to listen in tonight, and particularly thank you to Abby for doing this amazing work. And this is the kind of work we don't want to just put in a book or publish or let sit on a shelf. We want to make it active, real world, ongoing effort to continue to provide habitat for these birds. So that was from Tom. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to add to, like, going off of that statement, I will say one of the most special parts of conducting research in collaboration with a nonprofit, and collaborating with Hernando Audubon is that part where we can take the data, what we've learned, and actually create action from it. So it's really great what you all at Hernando Audubon are doing, and I really hope that you guys can stay involved and really advocate with these results that we now have from this research. And hopefully I'll stay as involved as I can, even though I'll be tuning in from meetings or something from Michigan. So, but I really hope that you guys can take this and really turn this into some action in your local community.
I mean, thank you very much. There's another thing that just came up on the chat. Someone was wondering if there was a research project done in the Ordway Preserve in Gainesville in the mid-'80s with this. It looks like it's possible that didn't get published. But Nancy's wondering about the relationship between Croom and the Arapaika Christmas Bird Count, and whether or not Croom is included in that or in Brooksville, and if that impacts the amount of time volunteers spend there and what they find.
I do not know the exact details of how the Christmas bird count within Hernando County is conducted. Probably like someone like Tom, or even like Bev might have a better answer to that, and like what areas are included and how time is dedicated. I know that there is generally like a group that's going to be looking at more of these upland pine areas, and really trying to survey there. But I can't speak to those like specific details.
I'm just going to throw it out, and then I'll defer to Bev, who might have a more detailed answer. But just geographically living here, if Croom was in, one of those bird count areas, it would definitely be Brooksville, just geographically, in terms of its proximity between Brooksville and Arapaika. So I'm going down. Everybody's up. Croom is in Brooksville. Yep. Okay. So Croom is in Brooksville, and that's okay. Vince and John Hawk do the portion, the southern part of Croom with the bird count. So that's perfect. Cindy commented that this is great and amazing work, and that land managers really do appreciate this data, and that's wonderful to hear. I know one of Tom's goals tonight was to invite folks from the Florida Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Commission, SwiftMud, Hernando County Lands Program, etc., to hear this. One, to thank them and congratulate them on the fact that Hernando County is doing so well with this, and two, to let them know that there's a lot of citizen support for the work that they're doing, and that we want to be a part of continuing to support that work and recognize that work and celebrate that work. And again, a little note from Tom: if you heard this tonight and you would like to be more involved in the effort to do that, to increase the amount of lands being both conserved and well managed, this is going to be something, again, he wants me to stress, will be part of the ongoing conservation work for our chapter, and that'll start to evolve in some projects that are being planned over the summer and really get kicked off in September when we start meeting on a monthly basis again. So a lot of support, Abby, in the chat for what you're doing. Does anyone else have a question about Abby's presentation? Nikki has a great question. So some of the upland pine forests needed actually are owned by farmers, private landowners, folks who may have large parcels of land that are not in public ownership. Is it time to start reaching out to them and encouraging them to use land management practices, or being open to supporting land management practices that would provide private areas as well as public areas where species like the red-headed woodpecker would thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a collaborative effort to make sure that this area is managed properly. And even, before we even approach the idea of making sure that that habitat is managed the way that it should be for woodpecker species and red-headed woodpecker specifically, I think really encouraging that land be set aside and still, those upland pine forests are still dedicated to the wildlife that lives there, I think is really important as well, encouraging landowners and like people that may not be these like giant entities to make sure that they still allow their land to be home to a lot of different wildlife species, including the red-headed woodpeckers. So I think that really that outreach work should start with making sure that that land stays upland pine, and then you can really move into more of those habitat management, the habitat management that you want to see in that area. But I think that it's a collaborative effort and everybody needs to get involved.
So just to take off on that, thank you, Abby. Nikki also points out that there's a lot of momentum right now with the Florida Wildlife Corridor project. And one of the things that it's driven is more funding for and support for working with private landowners, either for things like conservation easements or with agricultural landowners for conservation easements, or to keep land in a more rural designation. I know that the Department of Agriculture has programs to work with folks who are agricultural landowners and things like that. And the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has a whole private landowner program. And Gene Kelly, actually, a lot of you know, used to be involved in that when he worked for FWC, where there's management support or assistance, or there's resources available for large private landowners to manage their lands and sort of in conjunction with or in parallel to the public lands around them. So there's some really good programs, and maybe what we need to do is make sure that landowners in Hernando County are aware of those and work with the agencies like agriculture or forestry or FWC to make sure that there's common knowledge about who to go to in those agencies to get support for land management techniques. I know too, we have some great county foresters who are wonderful resources. Who also have a lot of information. I think Tom's big thing with this is the kind of conversation we need to have. The kind of conversation where we're talking about, okay, this is an exciting opportunity. There's a lot of good work being done, but how do we pull it together? And can Hernando Audubon be the linchpin of making that effort real in Hernando County? And Nikki says yes. So there you go. Any other questions or thoughts that folks want to put in the chat? A lot of very positive things about Abby's work and her conservation career. John mentioned he's a ecology supervisor in Croom and will be sharing your work with our resource folks, which is great. Cindy points
Awesome.
out that Antigua Hammock to the north might be another location. Swiftman owns some of those parcels. There's a lot of development around that in the like Royal Highlands area and some of those regions, but there's opportunities there still. And Nikki says, thank you, Abby. This is a great thing. And she's wondering if you might be available or able to present some of this data to other Audubon chapters in West Central Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of the messages in the chat asking that, people saying they want to give this data to like different groups, maybe like places that they work at. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my email in the chat. And then if anyone wants to reach out to me and have any of the resources I presented today or are interested in me like presenting to anyone, feel free. They can like reach out to me at my email and let me know if they are interested in me presenting any of these results. And like I said, I am working with a biologist at Audubon, Florida. And so hopefully the goal is that we'll be able to publish these results in an academic journal. And then hopefully once we finish a little bit more of the data analysis, I'm also hoping to publish it into for Audubon, Florida, and it'll be a much more digestible article as well. So that will be another resource that people are able to share. So I dropped my email in the chat, and feel free to send me a message if you guys would like to.
Great. I have one more. Abby, thank you very much. I know it's getting toward 8 o'clock, so I'll make this quick, but one more quick thing. Tom sent me a note a little while ago, just wanting me to let people know that anybody who participated tonight, or anybody who listened to this tonight, or signed up for this tonight, we're going to make sure we get information out to them about the Conservation Committee meetings that are coming up for Hernando Audubon, as well as our monthly meetings when we start meeting in September again. He wanted me to make sure that I invited everyone to come to those meetings. They're monthly meetings where we have programs from conservation experts. They're free and open to the public, and they're the fourth Thursday of the month from September through April. And then the last thing he wanted me to mention is one of our projects will be to work to convene some sort of land manager forum, some sort of opportunity where, we're just pulling people together, but we can get folks in the same room from a lot of these agencies to talk about common opportunities or common practices, or the best way to sort of take advantage of this, and that Audubon can be a citizen resource for volunteers or public support for agencies that are doing land management in Hernando County. So
yeah, and in that message, if like Tom's sending out anything like that to the participants at this chat, I can have him send out my contact info as well.
great. I will definitely. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
So a lot of people, again, have very positive words. Anything else before we wrap up? My dog's very supportive, if you hear in the background. So, all right. Well, if nobody else has anything else, Abby, again, this was amazing information. You did an incredible job. And I promise you, and Tom promises you, that this data will live on in real on the ground conservation work in Hernando County. And this is an exciting opportunity for us to celebrate some successes and commit to staying the course and even doing better work in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. All right. Well, we will sign off, and we will talk to you guys soon.